Good afternoon, friends. And Sumant, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. And let me say that I have attended some of your earlier events as well, and they've always been excellent. So I've always had a great time speaking to an audience like this about a topic of that I'm very passionate about, which is the idea of creative destruction. Now, of course, all of you are here to speak about insolvency and bankruptcy. And much of the discussions, of course, tended to be about this issue from a somewhat legal perspective. So I'm going to take you away to a somewhat related but wider issue, which is the perspective of economists. So why we want insolvency and bankruptcy in the first place. And the reason we want it is because IBC is in fact the process of creative, it's a critical part of the process of creative destruction, which is effectively the way both nature and economies evolve forward by essentially clearing away the inefficient and creating space for new green shoots to come up. So this is how nature has evolved. We have all evolved from single cell beings, amoebas or whatever, over millions of years to become people who can now come here and discuss insolvency and bankruptcy. In the same way, economies too have evolved effectively by constantly killing off the inefficient and allowing new innovations, new risk takers, new entrepreneurs to come up. And this fact may be obvious, but unfortunately in policy making, this issue does not come up in the first instance often enough, as a result of which we end up making policies in ways that are actually hurting the way the Indian economy evolves. So let me tell you a little bit about why India and Indian policy making has a problem with creative destruction. And to illustrate that to you, let me tell you about how India, China, and the US have seen its sort of its largest companies churn over 2 decades. So let's take India. I'm taking here the top 10 companies by market capitalization and comparing them between March 2005 and March 2025. Now it will come as some surprise to you to know that out of the 10 largest companies by market capitalization, 7 are exactly the same. So the same Reliance, Bharti Airtel, Tata Consultancy Service, Infosys, State Bank of India, Hindustan Unilever Limited, and so on. Even the 3 that have churned over and they've become new companies, they're actually not new blood. They're Life Insurance Corporation. Life Insurance Corporation has existence in 1955. It just happened to be listed now. It is Bajaj Finance. So essentially the top 10 companies in India by market capitalization, amazingly, contain absolutely no new blood. Now let me contrast that with how it is in the US. Same exercise. Compare the top 10 companies by market capitalization, March 2005, March 2025. There is only one company in common, Microsoft. Just one. At that time, the biggest companies in the US were companies like Walmart, GE, Citibank. They have all been replaced. Today's companies large companies are Tesla, Meta, which was till recently Facebook, Alphabet, which till recently was Google, Amazon, and so on and so forth. Look at the churn. This is also true of China. If you go to China and you do the same exercise, other than 3 old state-owned banks, 7 of them have changed. So 20 years ago, that list would have included Sinopec, which was a petroleum company. It would have had China Mobile. Today it has Tencent. It has Alibaba. It has There are several names that I can't remember because they are Chinese names. But there is this automobile company, what is it? BYD, that's right, BYD, at number 8. I had actually never heard of BYD till 2 years ago. Okay? Now it is completely disrupting automobiles around the world. Now, it is not just that the top 10 have churned over. Look at the age of Indian big companies and compare them to when the companies in these other countries were founded. So, in India, out of the top 10, there is only one company that was founded after 1990. And that company is Bharti Airtel. Look at when the others were set up. State Bank of India set up in 1921 as the Imperial Bank. Hindustan Unilever set up in 1933, and even then it was not new because it was actually a subsidiary of a company which is even older. Reliance, one of the younger companies, set up in 1973. This is how old our corporate sector is. Where is the churn? Compare this to what America does every few years. Most of the companies that are there in the top 10 of America were set up essentially in the 90s, late 90s. Alphabet, Meta was set up in 2004, and so on and so forth. Some of the older companies of the American group of top 10 were set up in Apple, 1977, and Microsoft, 1981. They are the oldest companies in that list. Whereas in our scenario, they would be among the youngest. This is also true of China. Other than the 3 state-owned banks, look at when their companies were set up. BYD was set up only in 2007. Alibaba and Tencent was set up in 1999. So the point I'm making to you is, we have a problem with churn. And in every successful great economy, the thing that strikes you is that there is continuous rise of first generation risk takers which go out there and completely disrupt things. And yet in India, we have in our head somehow that this kind of disruption is somehow bad. We may understand this in theory, but as I will tell you I will show you in just now, we somehow have in our head that this kind of rapid destruction of the old is somehow bad, and therefore what we don't do is to allow for new companies to emerge. Those companies can sometimes come from startups, but it's okay sometimes to have foreign companies to do this for us as well. After all, if Maruti Suzuki had not come into the Indian market, we would still have been driving around in those ambassador cars from Hindustan Motors. So it is very important to understand the importance of creative destruction. This has to be taught in our universities. This has to be taught to our administrators and policymakers in places like Labasna, so that it is embedded in our thinking process. So what should we do? For the first thing I would argue is that we need to, first of all, imbibe it culturally. Now this is quite odd that I have to make this case for a country where in our cultural traditions and religious traditions, we have known this for a long time. After all, why do I need to explain creative destruction to a country that worships Lord Shiva and Goddess Kali, which are embedded, who embed creative destruction? So we understand this very easily culturally. But when we talk about it in terms of insolvency and bankruptcy, even today it is seen as some sort of a moral failure rather than a financial or business failure. So you have a peculiar situation in insolvency and bankruptcy processes and courts where you hear the term something to the effect that, you know, at least a best effort should be made to save this company. Why? The whole purpose of a limited liability company, the whole purpose is to create a fictitious character that you can kill off. The modern world has been created by this fictitious character called a limited liability company. Killing it off is not like somehow preventing medical care to a much loved relative. Unfortunately, that is how that is presented. You know, at least we made a best effort to save it. Why? If those resources can be utilized somewhere else better in the economy, what we should do is to kill this company off as soon as possible. That is the whole basis of creative destruction. So this is the first point I want to make. Second and related point, we need to have policy making, financial regulation, which is aimed towards encouraging creative destruction. Unfortunately, much of our financial regulation is there in the name of investor protection, tries to essentially stop new forms of risk-taking happening in the first place. So I understand that there is one class of people may not want to take risk, and yes, they can put their money into a bank, and there is for them deposit insurance and other tools, so it's fair enough. But why do we allow the creative destruction not to happen in other kinds of, particularly equity-based financing? The whole point surely is to allow other forms of financing so that those risks can be taken, particularly at the cutting edge. SEBI, for example, does not allow you to list a company unless you have 3 years of profits. So therefore, something like Amazon would never have emerged in India. So now a very successful company like Oyo, for example, cannot be listed in India. It can list in Singapore, it can list in NASDAQ, but cannot list in India. Because we have this onerous idea that is embedded in our policy making that risk-taking is somehow bad, and any kind of risk-taking is somehow inimical to the interests of investors. I'm sorry, if an investor wants to invest into something risk-taking, they should be allowed to. This whole nanny state attitude is holding us back. Third, this is also true of the way we have attitudes towards our corporates, and the corporates have towards themselves. India's corporate sector is unnecessarily protected, in my view. As a policy maker, I am always in a position, I meet all kinds of industry delegations every day. And one of the things that strikes me is that to this day, I have never met an industry delegation from any industry in India which has actually asked for reforms. They all complain about this regulation, that regulation, etc. But in fact, they all love regulations because they see it as a moat, a way to protect themselves from both domestic and foreign competitors. So almost all the time, they will ask for protection. They may come from actually adding more regulation. It may come from tariffs or many other ways in which they will ask for protection. But they will never talk about ease of entry. If their need for protection comes from some great national cause, well, and sometimes there are indeed national security reasons why you may want to give protection to Indian industry. Let me say that that protection should certainly not extend to domestic competitors, first of all. After all, what great national cause is being served by protecting them from domestic competitors? Even in the case of foreign competitors, this should be done keeping our eyes open that we are condemning ourselves then to the ambassador car. Now, sometimes it may be okay, but the price we pay in the longer run may be very, very high. So this is another very important thing that we need to have embedded in our policies, that if you do not allow for continuous creative destruction, you will end up with a business elite, where basically we are protecting them not for creating great national champions. Instead, you are creating companies that do not invest in larger capacities, do not invest in research and development. You'll be shocked how little Indian industry invests in research and development. And basically, you are subsidizing the lifestyles of their children in Dubai running family offices. That is what we are basically subsidizing. As Indian citizens, we should not be bothering to do this. Let the creative destruction happen. Finally, this idea of creative destruction also applies to the government itself. I'm sorry to say that the government, central government, state government, at every level of government is full of institutions that should not have been created in the first place because they were created for some political or post-retirement gig type of reasons. But even the ones that did at some point in time, maybe had some purpose in the 1960s, I'm sorry, they have now run their course. We need to shut them down. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I have personally shut down large numbers of these bodies. We shut down the Tariff Commission. Has any of your lives become worse because of this? The All India Handicraft Board, has this made your life any worse? The Children's Film Society, has that made your life any worse? No. There are many, many more. We still have an Indian Salt Service. You've got to be kidding me. What do they do? Why do they exist? So, we need to be fairly brutal about this inside the government itself, whether it's outdated or not needed entities. They could be autonomous bodies, they could be departments, ministries, regulators. We need to shut them down. There are processes, there are hundreds of laws that are not needed. We need to get rid of them. And this has to be done systematically throughout the Indian state, by which I include the judiciary. So with that, let me stop and say that I'm open for questions, of course, but this process has to happen in the next 5 years. We will go, India has got an amazing opportunity in the next 25 years, but do remember at the end of the 25 years, we too will begin to age rapidly like all the other countries who are further up the demographic cycle, and we will have lost this opportunity. So 25 years, and we don't have a moment to lose. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.